Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of ModGear. This week, I'm driving the Toyota AE86, another JDM legend whose name comes from television, numbers, and more. So, let's get right into it, shall we? But before we begin this week's episode, let's take a step back in the past for a brief history lesson. Our story on the AE86 takes us back to 1983. Surprising to note, the AE86 is actually a Toyota Corolla, and as I say that, a single tear rolls down my face as I basically just disowned pretty much every single AE86 fan on the planet. I'm terribly sorry. Originally called the Toyota Corolla 11 or Sprinter Truno, whatever you want to call it, the name AE86 basically just comes from the series of car, not the actual name of the car itself. Even though everyone doesn't actually call it a Corolla, they call it an 86, why does no one call it a Corolla? I have no idea. So what exactly makes the AE86 such a remembered car? What makes it so memorable and exciting? Well, surprisingly a lot of things. I'll start with just, well, the basics. On a racing level, because again, Toyota, the AE86 was surprisingly light because again, sports car. It was easy to afford for racing teams and just for civilian use, and they were very easy to modify, much like a lot of cars that Toyota made at the time. Because, well, come on Toyota, even you want to mod stuff, let's be honest here. I mean, heck, the name Truno and Levin, and the languages? Yeah, Truno and Levin, based out of Spanish and Middle English, I believe. I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me. But these names actually translate to thunder and lightning, for crying out loud. So I'm pretty sure that, it's good. Let's be honest here. The AE86 also came standard with a 5-speed manual transmission and even an optional limited slip diff, which is something that a lot of modern sports cars have. You're gonna pay a lot, so that's kind of surprising for 1980. It also had strut bar suspension in the front and near 50-50 weight distribution. For a time like this was actually something very surprising from a lot of car manufacturers at the time. Powering this little, tiny, and, well, surprisingly nimble little nugget is a simple 1.6-liter inline-4, making around 130 horsepower. And in fact, you may actually know what this engine is because it's actually used in the first generation Toyota MR2 and is also facelifted for the Celica GTR. However, the engine, its transmission, its limited slip diff, its weight distribution, and its names and modability and racing, that isn't really necessarily what would technically consider the AE86 to be such a memorable icon. No. much like things like the Supra and the Skyline and the RX-7, who have made their debuts in the Fast and Furious. The AE86 first appeared in its very popular manga and anime series, Initial D, with the main character, of course, Takumi Fujiwara, driving an AE86 for racing and as well as delivering tofu, because let's be honest, that's totally a good story. As of today, the AE86 is still a drifting and automotive icon, and if you've ever seen one on the road, you may want to have a second pair of pants ready, because again, while these things may look very subtle and very calming, under their hoods they can pack lots of power, but not a lot. Again, many people say that the AE86 was basically the godsend of drifting, because again, a lot of drifters, they drift them because they're made for drifting. I mean, let's be honest here. Not many of them were sold in America, as we didn't actually get the actual AE86 one. Instead, we got this very ballsy Corolla, basically. So if you want to find an AE86, you're probably going to have to import one from Japan, because let's be honest, Japan gets all the good stuff. No offense, Japan. But again, as of today, the AE86 is now known for drifting and just all-around car shows, because again, the AE86 is one of the most important cars in the JDM scene and the automotive scene as well. But with that surprisingly short, interesting, I guess you could say, history lesson out of the way, then we can get to this week's episode. Take it away, Panda! Thank you, Mr. History Panda, and with that, we can begin today's tests, starting with a top speed test. Welcome to the Genesis 1 Mile Dragway. It's a place where many cars come to push their engines, and well, a surprisingly large amount of their speed, to their limit, simply to put their speed onto the boards. So let's see how the AE86 can do in this test. The Truno AE86, whichever one you want to call it, topped out at a wickedly fast 124.2 miles per hour, but with some further testing, it did manage to reach a 126.1 miles per hour. It almost seems too fast, and I wasn't expecting the speed to come out of a car like this. So a very awesome run from the AE86. Next up is the power sliding effect of the brake test. The goal of this test is very simple. The cars will deploy all 4 of their brakes once they pass this white line. The goal is to not hit the parked Nissan Leaf, and if you do, you want to measure your distance based on how far the Nissan Leaf moves from its parking spot. So let's see how the AE86 can do in this test. Surprisingly enough, the AE86 did very well here, and the Nissan Leaf barely moved at all, because, well, the AE86 doesn't really have much sliding after you hit the brakes, and it stops on the dime. So, a very good run from the Truno, AE86, whatever you want to call it. Next up is the cornering test, and to do that, I've come here. This is the Forksville Test Circuit. Developed by the ModGear development team, it's used to help judge a car's endurance on tight corners, tight bends, and jumps, to further help prove what a car can face on a track-like setting. So let's see how well the AE86 can tackle a track-focused setting on the Forksville Test Circuit. The AE86 is, well, it's a bit hard to judge on this course. The car is very slippery and can spin out under very hard turning, cornering, and hard braking, but it does make up for this in speed and overall cornering ability. It's an okay run in some places, but also not in others, so it's a medium run altogether for the AE86. but I could definitely see more improvement over things like spinouts. Next up is the breaking it up in here of the parallel park test. The goal of this test is very simple. We want to make sure that we can park this car between these two parked Renault Meganes. The goal is we want to make sure that we can have one person walk in front of the car and at the back of the car. So let's see how the AE86 can do in this test. And with tremendous ease, the AE86 passes this test. Next up is the family friendliness of the gravel road segment. This test is used to help judge a car's endurance on a day-to-day driving conditions, whether this be bumps, potholes, these kind of things. We want to see how well the AE86 can do in suspension travel. So let's see how well the AE86 can do in the gravel road segment. The AE86 doesn't ride terribly, but it's still pretty bad. You're gonna feel definitely a lot of the bumps, but they're not gonna be as harsh as, say, cars like the RX-7, the Supra, or the 350Z, as seen from earlier in this season. But you are definitely going to feel a lot of these bumps, as suspension travel isn't great, but it's okay for a car like this. So therefore, it's an okay run from the AE86. Next up is your neighbor's road on the bump test. The goal of this test is also very simple. We want to see how well cars can endure on day-to-day conditions in bumps and just, bumps. Speed bumps, bumps in roads, that kind of thing, to also help see how well the back end and the front of the cars handle tight bumps. So let's see how well the AE86 can do in the bump test. The AE86 did somewhat okay in this test. I had worries that the back end might hit a lot of these bumps, as again, this car is surprisingly low, and while it didn't, it was still definitely getting very close to doing so. Overall though, the car did tackle these bumps pretty well without the undercarriage hitting the bumps or anything, but it was still a bit rough either way because again, the car's low and it does go over bumps very harsh. It's an okay run from the AE86. Next up is the nauseousness, yeah, that's a thing, of the slalom test. The goal of this test is very similar to the cornering test. We want to see how a car can improve speed through body roll, and a loss of cornering through speed to see how well this can affect them on a track focus setting. So let's see how well the AE86 can do in the slalom test. Again, much like in the cornering test, the AE86 has a pretty good turning radius, similar to that of the RX-7 from a few episodes back. But it does spin its wheels like it's on drugs, essentially, coming out of corners and, well, when you're turning. But even then, it's still a very awesome run from the AE86, but I would definitely love to see an improvement on spinning its wheels. The MPG figures the AE86 has are actually really impressive, with an average of 24 miles per gallon in the city and 30 miles per gallon in highway. It's definitely a, well, Corolla, if you ask me, please don't hurt me. But how well do these figures apply on the track? And now, let's give the Toyota AE86, Truno, whatever you want to call it, an official lap around the Futaro circuit. The official standard time is 1:49:32. With added up accidents and collisions, the final adjusted time is 1:49:32.
Another day at work again. ワンダーウェア ILLB デリバリング豆腐トゥデイ。
The fuck is that? Good morning!
ボス、give me the 豆腐。I got work to do.
Oh no! Yo, what's up?
ほう、向かってくるのか。試すほどでもなかったようだが。試すっていうのは。はあ、くだらん挑発に乗ってやって。
You and me, right now, we're having it out. Let's go, come on.
Oh, no fucking way.
Bring me that bass!
God fucking damn it!
Ah! Oh my god! Oh my god!
I don't give a fuck!
Do you like my car?
Stop right there, criminal scum!
Stop breaking the law!
Get seated ready, 'cause I'm waiting for you. It's gonna be so exciting.
Oh shit!
Take my car, gonna see me. Gonna drive along till I get.
What the fuck?
Hi, how are you?
Thank you!
So, what are my final thoughts on the Toyota AE86? Well, to start, this car does not have very good grip. It's slippery all over the place, and your handling is definitely going to be affected on tracks and, well, basically road conditions as a whole. So don't take this car out in the rain. It's very slippery with, hard braking, hard turning, hard cornering, you're going to spin out. But it does make up for this in its wickedly fast top speed, and of course, well, it's braking, let's be honest, it actually does brake pretty well. I'd highly suggest that if you could find one of these online or at your local dealer, even though they don't actually sell them at your local dealers, but you could probably find these things for relatively cheap, I would say, but it's always debatable depending on the JDM market, because, markets. But if you can find one, go for it. This is a very good car that I highly engage that you at least experience once in your life, or at least see one. But anyway, on that awesome note, it's time to end. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Good night.